Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very special Frankincense mini-series, Right Fright Nights. Each week this October on Frankincense, we will be profiling a spine-tingling, fright-tastic ghoul of the far right. My name is Freaky Frank Cervarich. I am joined every week by my co-ghost, Mitch the Wolfman Lerner.
We are two comedians and podcasters with a sick fascination for one of the great evils of the world, American politics.
I want everyone to know that Frank is doing this live. This is not pre-recorded. I'm on the line, and he's doing this.
Welcome to this week's episode of Right Fright Nights.
It's perfect.
Hi, Mitch. How are you?
Great, Frank. How are you? That was excellent.
Good. Thank you.
It was scary and
so
spooky.
Much. Thank you so much. Yes, I hope I didn't make you poop your pants with terror.
No, with joy.
With joy.
Before we get into this week's ghoulish tale, this is episode 2 of Right Fright Nights. If you missed last week's episode, go back and listen to it, if you dare. Last week, we released the recordings from our trip to the Nixon Presidential Library. This week, we present to you the tale of the rise and the fall, and the rise again, and the fall again of Richard Nixon.
Mitch, our last episode that came out, we went to the Nixon Library. The Nixon Library episode just came out. We're here a few months later. Listening back to it, what was your reaction? How are you feeling?
It was mostly like, I can't believe we went to the Nixon Library. and also a little bit of like, oh, we went to the Nixon Library. And just a tinge of, we did that. That's what we did. We chose to do that.
Yeah. And then, listeners don't know this, but later that day, we went to Musso and Frank's, a great restaurant out in Hollywood. And then we saw the film 8.5. So we had a real day that day, Mitch.
Oh, it was awesome. Awesome day. Except for like the many hours in which we went to the Nixon Library. Wait, hang on. How do you feel about going? About, you're listening back and like that being your big California field trip. How do you feel about that?
I loved it. I loved listening back to it. I love that we did it. I don't love how mad it made me, but I did learn a lot about myself that I've talked about in therapy. No joke. After that episode, I talked about the whole like feeling of being like really naive and like feeling like, well, they can't lie to us at this museum. They have to tell the truth. And that whole part of my brain, that rose-colored part of my brain, I don't know. It was kind of fun to listen to that in real time and to hear. There were so many specific details I forgot, like the books at the gift shop. I forgot about, Newt Gingrich and his relationship with his wife, which apparently...
I never forget about that.
Apparently they have a very successful relationship.
I'm sure your therapist must have been like, you were like, well, I went to the Nixon Library. Your therapist was like, code 4? This is gonna be a double session.
Yeah,
move my schedule.
Yeah. We're gonna need to book a couple appointments this week.
Another Nixon Library hour. Perfect.
Yeah, I wonder how many people get thrown into existential crisis after going to the Nixon Library.
I mean, the Nixon Library has its own chapter in the DSM-4. It's in the root causes part.
When you look up that, I don't know if you've ever been to therapy, but when they give you your monthly like statement or whatever, that your invoice, they have the DSM code of like whatever your, specific thing is that they say that they're treating for. So, one of them's like generalized anxiety or generalized depression, or, if you have something more serious, it could be bipolar or whatever. What you're saying is that if you looked up the number associated with my July invoice from my therapist, it would lead to an entry in the DSM that says Richard Nixon Library on it.
That is exactly what I'm saying.
I believe it.
it. And there's plenty more after the DSM-6 comes out. There's going to be a whole, Trump thing. There's going to be, there's going to be a whole COVID. The DSM-7 is just going to be COVID. That all COVID-related problems.
DSM-7 went woke, though,
That's true.
I don't know. That's too. That might be too triggering to say on the air, but yeah.
Yeah.
I don't want to trigger people out there. I was thinking about this today, actually. Let's do this before. I'll do my Nixon intro right after this. But I was thinking about this today. Do you think that Nixon would be like a culture warrior MAGA guy if he were around today? I don't know if he kind of strikes me as more of like a Cheney type of like, deals in back rooms, business wing of the party, but not necessarily like, and we'll get into it, but a lot of his policies were not like, separating families and abolishing healthcare and that sort of thing.
It's funny to frame it like that because part of that is like when you're trying to compare guys who play sports at different times, being like, this guy was the best at maybe this guy was the best, where the whole game was just kind of totally different.
Totally.
So like Nixon, I do believe, would have done whatever he needed to do to win. But so on that front, like, sure, yeah, if he had to, say racial slurs while in a wrestling ring, then he probably would have done it if he had to win.
Probably.
But he also was for the Equal Rights Amendment when Reagan, the next large Republican figure, was opposed to it not that long after. So there is that stark study, but like it's hard to compare across time, but you do have a couple of windows into like, Nixon was horrible in so many ways, but that wasn't one of them. And then the Republican machine became that kind of horrible very quickly after. So it's hard to say.
I just love the idea of like Nixon being around today, like being like, oh, the Little Mermaid, they went woke in the new Little Mermaid,
That's great.
It's just funny to imagine him doing that,
Although if you listen or read the transcripts of some of those tapes, he definitely would have been upset at colorblind casting. He would have hated it.
You know what? You know who else he didn't like? Jewish people, gay people. There's a long list.
So wait, let's just backtrack on everything we said. Yes,
he would have been. He would be fully in.
If he was allowed to say the quiet part out loud, he absolutely would have done it.
He would have loved it. All right, are you ready to talk about Richard Nixon and get to know this guy?
Sadly, yes.
All right, let's go. This week, we bring you the tale of one of the greatest tricksters in American history, Richard Milhaus Nixon, also known as Tricky Dick. Now, you may know parts of this story, but I assure you there are twists and turns that will leave you clinging to the edge of your seat. Our story begins over 100 years ago in sunny California. All right, so Richard
Great
Nixon.
job. Great
Thank
job.
you so much. Thank you so much. So Richard Nixon, born in 1913, grew up poor. His family owned a service station. His dad had anger issues. He had a mad dad. He had brothers, and one of his brothers died when he was growing up, and he was very sad about that. He plays football. He goes to college. He goes to Duke Law School, as we learned in our previous episode.
Boo hiss.
It explains a lot about him. And then he enlists in the Navy in 1942. That's basically like the early life of Richard Nixon. But I want to cut ahead for a second, Mitch. There's a tradition that we do on some of our movie episodes, and we've done it for other political episodes that we've done. I call it like an opening ceremony where we just hear like a little clip or a little sound or whatever, a song sometimes, to like give a little bit of context, give a little bit of flavor for the person. And I have one that I want to share with you for Nixon. All right, so this is a song, and I think you're really going to like the lyrics to this song.
Come on and click with Dick, the one that none can lick. He's the man to lead the USA. In Dick we have the one who truly gets things done. Every time he has the say.
Isn't it so cute that this is like not that long ago? This was a song for Richard Nixon in the 1960 presidential campaign called Click with Dick. And I'm going to share my screen with you. And they had these clickers.
They did rhyme. They rhymed lick, right?
Yes.
Lick was part of that.
Yes.
Great.
Come on and click with Dick, the one that none can lick.
No one can lick our dick.
That's right. That's right. Okay. I got to ask like my parents and stuff about this. Mom and Dad, get at me if you're listening. So was Dick not like Dick back then? When did Dick become, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It still meant that, right?
I'm Dick, as far as I know, has always meant dick.
Right.
But also, I guess there's no context before the ones in which we live. You know,
Right.
we are a culmination of everything that has come before us and
Sure.
everything that comes after us. We did not just fall out of a coconut tree. So there was a moment when Dick became Dick. Just like bussin' used to just
Yes.
mean getting on a bus and going somewhere. You know, bussin' used to be very controversial.
Nixon was opposed to bussin'.
Yeah, Nixon, not big into bussin'.
Not big into bussin'.
He
Nixon
wasn't
was
a
not
big
bussin'.
bussin' dick.
But no one can lick this Dick. He's the man to lead the USA. In Dick, we have the one who truly gets things done. So that's like not that long ago. That's what political advertising was in the United States of America. And they had these things. It says "click with Dick" on it. It's like a clicker. You know, the like you.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
you, like, press it together with your fingers and it makes the noise. Yeah.
Like a Snapple cap.
Yeah. Oh, man, when was the last time you had a Snapple?
Well, I can tell you that as soon as we're done, I'm going to a 7-Eleven and getting a Diet Peach Snapple. That's going to happen.
Is it Nantucket Nectar or is it Snapple that has the facts on the bottom of the lid?
Oh, those are Snapple facts, bro.
Snapple. Nice. Well, let's get at you with a few more Snapple facts about Richard Nixon. So, all right, I want to give a brief overview. We already touched on his early life. We got that out of the way. We heard the great song, Click with Dick. And now I just want to give kind of my thoughts on this guy. You know, there's like a lot I want to get to, but here's like a summary, a brief summary of Richard Nixon. I love him because he's a man of contradictions. He's incredibly cynical, but he's also very intelligent. He's paranoid. He's a liar. He's vindictive. He's mean. He's spiteful. He did not like the media. He did not like historians. He did not like the establishment. As previously mentioned, he did not like the Jews or homosexuals.
He did not like them, Sam I Am.
But he was one of the original content creators, if you think about it. You know, he had the White House rigged so that he could be podcasting. He was a podcaster, Nick. This is one of our guys.
He lived in a hype house. He basically made the White House a hype house.
Yes. But yeah, like we talked about before, he governed mostly from the center right, but even to the left a little bit on some issues. But he was also obviously obsessed with the preservation of his own power. There's a quote I found here from someone I don't have the name of right next to this, so I'll edit it in later.
Ewan W. Morgan.
The quote goes like this. No other major figure... God damn it. If I could fucking read. No other...
Wait, you have to read to be on this podcast? Oh, no.
Quote, no other major figure of 20th century American politics has been subject to such divergent characterization, such diffuse terms as populist, liberal, conservative, free world crusader, red baiter, mad bomber, and peacemaker have all been used to describe him at one stage or another. And I think that's true. And that's why I like him. I really do respect Nixon. I find him to be an interesting guy because he's very complex. However, in the words of Daniel Frick, who is a historian, quote, when we fight about Nixon, we are fighting about the meaning of America, and that is a struggle that never ends. And I think that's true. I actually do agree with that when we talk about Nixon, like when we talk about a lot of things in America, we're actually talking about a lot of things and a lot of ideas. And I do think that this fight is still going on today, and I will prove it to you at the end of this episode, Mitch, and dear listener. And I do think, for all of our joking, all of our levity, I think he was a really bad guy. I think he did really bad things, and I want that to be clear, because while we may joke about this guy, I do think that there is a very history is a very like moderating force, especially while we live in a time where things are so extreme and so much worse, I would argue, than Richard Nixon. That it's easy to like, it's like the George W. Bush effect, you know, where it's like, oh, he wasn't so bad or whatever. And he really was a bad guy, but I do kind of respect the guy. So I'll pause there.
Nixon or Bush?
Nixon. I do not respect Bush that much.
Great. Cool.
I think Bush's ideology is much less interesting than Nixon's.
Yeah, and arguably more destructive, but We're getting way ahead of ourselves.
Yeah. That's for a much later episode. Yeah. All right. So let's start to go through this. So we already did his early life, his early political career. So he was elected to the House in 1947 when he was 34 years old. So he got started in politics really young. He kind of cut his teeth on the Committee of Un-American Activities.
Oh, so, his big, beautiful chompers just munching on communists.
Nom, 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 nom. Reds, pinks, 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 pinks. Nom, 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 nom.
You know, his face was the inspiration behind Pac-Man.
Wait, really?
Yeah, sure. I mean, look at his mouth. Some nice teeth.
You know, now that you mention it, I do see the resemblance between the two.
Kind of sounds like him, too. Sorry, we were talking. Bad guy. He's a bad guy.
He's a bad guy. But he does look like Pac-Man. And
so you gotta give him that.
Come to think of it, Pat Nixon, more like Mrs. Pac-Man.
That it. More like Mrs. Pac-Man. That's exactly right. You know, the Mrs. Pac-Man's lipstick color is the exact same that Pat Nixon wore to the first inauguration. Not the second one. That one's canceled. But the first one.
Really?
Same exact color. Yep.
Really? Wow.
Yep. 8-bit red. That's what it's called. Anytime you go up to the makeup desk, you know,
ask for 8-bit red.
Yeah.
Okay. Is that what J.D. Vance was wearing on Tuesday night?
Old smoky eyes.
Old smoky eyes himself. Well, speaking of a smoky eye, Nixon has a very defined brow line. He's got very defined eyes. Hold on, Mitch. It's prompting me to file away. Okay, great. I had to file away the first recording from the crash of the Zoom. So
the great Zoom crash of 10 minutes ago.
Yes, listeners, it's true. Our Zoom did crash about 20 minutes into the episode, but it has been seamlessly edited out of this episode. Nevertheless, it did lead us to speculate. I think Nixon's rat fucking this episode. I'm just going to go ahead and say it.
We did visit his gravesite and then speak poorly about him.
But we were respectful when we were there. We didn't say anything naughty in front of him.
I do have thoughts about being there that I want to save for the end of this.
Okay, great. So as a member of the House on the Committee of Un-American Activities, which, by the way, stupid name, he was involved in the investigation of Alger Hiss, which is a thing I don't really know that much about, except that he was a State Department guy. And, of course, the McCarthy and all the Republicans were obsessed with rooting out communism from the government in the post World War II era. And Nixon was very involved in getting evidence that forced Alger Hiss to resign, and it was a big scandal. So that is where Nixon, first starts cutting those beautiful Pac-Man chompers.
It's where the phrase boo hiss comes from.
Is that right?
Yes.
Really? As in boo Alger Hiss?
Yes, as in boo Alger Hiss.
Wow. I thought they were booing snakes.
I was saying boo hiss.
He runs for Senate in 1950. He earns the name Tricky Dick way back then because he smeared his opponent as a communist. He fought unfair. He was running against a lady. Okay, so California was pretty woke even back then. And he was 37 years old. He becomes a senator when he was 37 years old. And he's not in the Senate for very long before General Dwight Ike Eisenhower decides to run for president and picks Nixon as his running mate. Or I guess the convention did, because they didn't. This is a whole thing we'll talk about later, but they didn't do conventions the same way back then. The party bosses nominated the candidates. So Nixon gets picked at the ripe old age of 40 years old to be the vice president to Eisenhower.
How much of that do you think was we do not want to hang out with this guy in the Senate. Get him the fuck out of here.
He weird.
Stinks. Yeah. He's weird. He smells like cognac and fucking cottage cheese farts.
Yeah, he has all these cottage cheese farts.
Just let him make the military guy deal with him.
So he does. He goes and he hangs out with Ike Eisenhower for 8 years as vice president. The biggest scandal of that time, and sort of his biggest event during that era, was the discovery of the slush fund, and it became a big topic of controversy. It was like this apparently legal fund that existed that some donors had a big pool of money, and they were sending payments to Nixon, which gave him this kind of the shadow of corruption and that sort of thing, like rich people paying for stuff for him. And I didn't read that much about it, so I don't know. That could be true. But Nixon uses
because that entire thing is just what our entire politics is now.
Correct.
So it's a boring scandal because you're like, oh, you mean money in politics?
Yes. You
Which
mean
is
a
so
super
shitty.
PAC. Yeah.
The way that you described it is perfect. This apparently legal thing. That's it. That's money in politics. Apparently legal.
Yeah. And apparently it was legal back then too. So Nixon gets on TV. This is a big moment in his career, and sort of like a jujitsu move. He ends the speech he goes in the speech. He sort of lays out what he spent this money on and how it wasn't wrong. And, we did $1,000 here and blah, 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 blah.
Sex workers are workers. Sex work is work.
I don't know how he felt about sex work, but, I wouldn't be surprised. He does talk about his dog, Checkers, in the speech.
In the slush fund speech?
Yes. It is known as the Checkers speech because at the end of the speech, he goes, and by the way, I did use some of the money for a personal expense, if you want to be honest. I bought my 2 daughters a puppy named Checkers, and it makes them very happy. And if that's a crime, then lock me up. That's basically the gist of what he's saying.
Oh, that's so good. Oh, my God.
Yeah. And it's super effective. The scandal basically goes away, and big moment in his career.
Now, I might be a monster, but look at this puppy. Look at it.
Yeah, so
That's awesome.
that is everything up to when he runs for president the first time. Because like I said at the end of our last episode, Mitch, what we're here to talk about today is really the rise, the fall, the rise again, and then the fall again of Richard Nixon. So in 1960, he decides he's going to run for president. He announces his candidacy in January of 1960. Campaigns were much shorter back then. You literally would decide basically that year. There was not a culture of preparing years in advance and all that stuff. It was basically the year before, maybe at the end of the year before or the year of, you're like, okay, I'm throwing my hat in the ring.
Let's bring that back. It has been so much more pleasant with Harris. Let's bring that back.
Yes, absolutely. This never-ending grind of a campaign cycle I think it really it makes people who don't care about politics more checked out because it just feels like it never ends and it doesn't feel definitive. It doesn't. I don't know. It's
a huge, colossal waste of money, resources, time, energy. This campaign, which
apparently legal money, by the way,
apparently legal money. This campaign, that feels like it's been going forever at this point because the honeymoon is over with Harris, and now we're just in the thick of election season. If that's genuinely an 8 to 6 month thing, we can live with that as a society. It will not crumble our society if we hate each other for 6 months every 4 years.
And that was literally how it would be. They would choose. Primaries didn't really matter back then. They kind of mattered, of course, because it measured the electorate and stuff. But when they were doing closed conventions, they would just choose whoever. So you would get your candidates at the end of the summer. You would start campaigning in September. Basically.
It's fucking sweeps. You're getting a new season of Friends. You're getting fucking new Seinfeld. You're getting a new presidential candidate. Let's go.
Baseball playoffs, football season, Let's go.
I want the candidates revealed on the first Sunday of NFL football.
Now there's an idea. You have Carrie Underwood singing "Whoa, Sunday Night," and then the curtains come up and it's Kamala Harris said, "Whoa, Sunday night," and then Donald Trump, and then they have to play football.
Bob
against
Costas
each other.
does a 2-minute interview. Done.
Bada bing, bada boom. All right, so September 26, 1960, the Kennedy versus Nixon debate. Probably the worst presidential debate until this year.
Yeah, it used to be definitive. Now it's still definitive, but different answer.
But it's probably... I don't know. What do you think? Is it probably number 2 now? Because it ended the candidacy of Joe Biden. Nixon still made it to the election after this debate.
It is so number 2. It could not be more clear that the worst presidential debate performance in modern history was Joe Biden being eliminated from contention by his own party.
Poor guy.
Yeah, Nixon, had sort of a longer tail, and I think that there's a lot more
Nixon didn't have a
going
tail.
on in that
I'm going to say a lot of mean things about Nixon, but he didn't have a tail.
Well, he thinks I had horns.
Because you're a member of the Jewish faith, of course.
What? That's not what I meant at all. It's because I was being the devil for Halloween. What? That's a horrible thing to say. Why would... Oh, my God.
Anyway, so Kennedy looks great. He has his makeup done. You know, he gets all yassified before the debate. Nixon's like, no, I don't need any of that homo stuff. And I'm assuming that's what he said. He goes without makeup. He wears a gray suit on a gray background. It's shot in black and white. So he just doesn't, he's not popping, you know, like kids today get it, you know, with our Instagram filters and our Snapchats, you know, we get it. Yeah, so it's a bad campaign for him. You know, sort of famously, he wins in the radio version of the debate, but he loses in the television version of the debate. Another fun fact about this campaign cycle, he does the peace sign thing as early as this 1960 campaign. I couldn't find anything from earlier than that, but he took it from Eisenhower, and it meant V for victory. It was not a peace sign thing yet. It was a V for victory. So there you go. So he loses to Kennedy. It's actually a pretty close election. It's basically like a margin of like 500,000 votes or something like that. So he almost gets there. He's very surprisingly gracious in his concession speech. He's like laughing and smiling. He's like, well, we didn't get it done. And he's like, and like the whole crowd's like, oh, and he's like, yes, I know. And like, it's actually like kind of, you know, kind of respectable, like the way he handles it, particularly viewed through a modern context.
Compared to sicking a gang on the Capitol, compared to that.
Yeah.
Do you think that part of him being sort of congenial on TV was him knowing, like, I am young, I have a lot of time to rise to power?
I think that's possible, and I think something else I kind of like about him, and I'll admit this here, and we'll get into this later, but he knew, he talks about it in a number of interviews. He was going up against like a beautiful couple, like beautiful, wealthy, young, vibrant, you know, like selling hope, selling glamour, selling like social grace, you know, and he wasn't that. And so I think he had a conception of why he lost that maybe was the wrong reasons. You know, I think he like might have discounted some of Kennedy's like skills as a politician and just been a little bit bitter about like the superficial aspects of it. Because as I said in last episode, I think Nixon was handsome as a younger man. I'll admit it. But by the time he's, you know, 48, and he's running against Kennedy. I mean, Kennedy is much more of a snack than Nixon is.
If the presidential race is a riz-off,
yeah,
which it kind of is, then he's lost. He's lost the riz-off. He's riz out of there, baby.
Kennedy was a riz king for sure.
But seriously, though,
yeah,
I think that he was probably right. I didn't know that he broke it down that way. But when you look at one of the constants of politics since, you know, the dawn of television, you know, you go to Bush Gore again, you go to Clinton Bush, you know, you go
Kerry Bush.
Yeah, Reagan, Dukakis. I mean, there's a whole lot of... Yeah, Kerry Bush, Jesus. But there's a whole lot of...
Who would you rather have a beer with?
Trump, Hillary.
Yeah.
Like, you know, it is like the who's cool.
Yeah, totally. I think it's a popularity contest for sure. You know, I'm going to skip ahead, actually, to something from the 68 campaign. I want to play something for you because it kind of gets to what we're talking about here. So this is the longest clip I'll play. It's about 2 minutes long. So this is a interview from 60 Minutes from the 1968 campaign. So I'm going to hit play. Mitch, if you want me to stop, just tell me to stop.
Also suggest that you were awed, almost overawed by Jack Kennedy's money, social grace, position.
No, I don't buy that. I think everybody tries to rewrite history in terms of what the book should read. But while I do not have money, and perhaps while I am not blessed with particular social grace. I have a confidence that comes from a different source. I fought my way up all the way. And I don't mean that somebody who didn't have to fight his way can't make it too. But believe me, when you've gone through the fires of having to work your way through school, of having to fight campaigns with no money, of having to do it all on your own, you come out a pretty strong man, and you're not in awe of anybody.
There's been so much talk in recent years of style and of charisma. No one suggests that either you or your opponent, Hubert Humphrey, have a good deal of it. Have you...
I'm going to pause real quick. How fucking brutal is this question?
That is a serious burn.
You're an ugly, uncharismatic piece of shit. How would you respond to that?
Anyway, yeah, go.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, was there a question in there?
Yeah. Anyway, I love his response to the first thing. We've got a minute left on this, but I love his response of like, I might not have all the social graces, but I work hard, it's likable. I get it. I get the Nixon thing from watching interviews like this.
It is. I do like it. I like half of that answer. And then part of it too, of like but I did it all myself bit.
Yeah.
That's the part of conservatism, I think, that really bothers me. Of like, this guy is so full of fucking piss and vinegar that, it makes him strong and formidable, but also like, what the fuck are you talking about? You did it by yourself.
Yeah.
How many people work on your fucking campaign? How many volunteers have worked for you over the years? Like, you did not do this by yourself. You live in a society. But yes, it's an impressive answer. He's an impressive guy.
He learned how to navigate that well. Here, we'll back it up so you can hear the body slam he's about to take again.
There's been so much talk in recent years of style and of charisma. No one suggests that either you or your opponent, Hubert Humphrey, have a good deal of it. Have you given no thought to this aspect of campaigning and of leading?
Well, when style and charisma connotes the idea of contriving of public relations, I don't buy it at all. As I look back on the history of this country, some of our great leaders would not have been perhaps great television personalities, but they were great presidents because of what they stood for, because of their principle, their courage, their character. Now, I hope to win this election. If I do win this election, I think I will conduct the presidency in a way that I will command the respect of the American people. That may not be the same style of some of my predecessors, but it will enable me to lead. Let me make this one point. Some public men are destined to be loved, and other public men are destined to be disliked. But the most important thing about a public man is not whether he's loved or disliked, but whether he's respected. And I hope to restore respect to the presidency at all levels by my conduct. And as far as the charisma and all the PR tricks and everything else that's supposed to make you look like a matinee idol, forget it. If that's what they want in a president, I'm not the man.
Anyway, really funny that he says he wants to restore respect to the presidency, given what ultimately happens with him. But I do like the sentiment of what he's trying to say. He has I get it. He's he positions himself as the underdog, right? He's like, I'm not the most beautiful. I'm not the Riz God, but I work harder than anybody else. And that's a good pitch. I get him as a candidate in a way I didn't necessarily get it before.
It's 1968.
Mm-hmm.
He's talking to people who are in their living rooms, and he's being like, hey, if you're watching 60 Minutes, you're probably sick of this hippie shit, right?
Yeah.
All these fucking kids running around with their, ideals and telling you that you don't know what's going on. Aren't you tired of this shit? Don't you want a fucking adult in charge who does not give a fuck what they think?
Yeah.
That's the pitch. That's the between the lines pitch that he's making. And I do love at the end of that clip where he's like,
let me just make one completely off the cuff point that I had not thought of before.
Some men are, and goes into a parable quote. Not parable's not the right word, but he goes into.
It's a what do you call it? Aphorism.
Yes.
Yeah. There we go. We got there. All right. So just to go back in time real quick to make sure we cover it, he runs for California governor in 1962. He loses against Jerry Brown, and he says famously, "You won't have Richard Nixon to kick around anymore." And he bitterly resigns from politics. He goes away for 6 years. And like you said in our last episode, he does something really smart, which is basically he goes around all over the country and he just appears at events and he shakes hands and he works the Republican Party. So he stays relevant. But based on what I've read, and this could not be true, I would totally believe it, that he was just biding his time. He was genuinely considering not coming back to politics because, I get it. If you lose a campaign for presidency, that probably sucks a lot. And so apparently he really did have to get talked back into coming back in 68, which is interesting because his opponents in 68 were actually pretty big names. They were other Republicans they could have gone with, but they ended up going with Richard Nixon.
Who were some of the people that he beat out?
He beats out George Romney, father of Mitt Romney, a man who eats frozen salmon with ketchup on it.
I'm sorry, little mittens, I won't be president.
His other... What was the dog they had on the top of their car? Remember that whole thing?
Luggage.
Anyway, luggage. Was that the name of the dog? Luggage? Yeah.
Yep.
His other opponents, Nelson Rockefeller. Ever heard of him? Yes. And then his third opponent, who didn't run yet, but we're going to talk a whole lot about in a couple episodes. Next episode, maybe even. Ronald Reagan was circling the nomination here and was talked out of it because Nixon was also a California Republican. So there's still very much the country club thing of okay, if you're gonna go, then I'll hold off.
And everyone was like, "Oh yeah, we could just make a movie star president."
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Give it to Nixon. Come on.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So on the Democrat side, apparently there's some historical evidence that Billy Graham, who we might talk about later, leaks to Nixon that LBJ probably won't run, which is one of the reasons why Nixon gets into the race. Nixon, via Graham, commits to not shaming LBJ personally. He vows that he's not going to say Johnson was a terrible president or anything like that. He's not going to do that. So they basically have an armistice between Nixon and Johnson.
That's the only armistice that Johnson could fucking figure out.
Well, and the only one that Nixon could figure out for quite some time. LBJ decides not to run again in March. He gets his ass kicked, or nearly gets his ass kicked in a primary in March in New Hampshire. And he's like, oh, fuck. And he's like, I'm bowing out. I'm bowing out of the nomination. He pulls a Biden. He's like, I'm not going to do this. MLK, Martin Luther King, gets assassinated in April. There are riots all over the country afterwards. So that is very much in the ether at the time. Bobby Kennedy is assassinated in June. Bobby Kennedy was presumed to be the nominee against whoever the Republican was going to be that year. He's assassinated. He would have fucking
won.
He would have fucking won, dude. He absolutely would have won. Hubert Humphrey, who is the nominee... or who is the vice president to LBJ, he's nominated in Chicago. It's a closed-door convention, like we mentioned. This is the last closed-door convention. So this is the last time that the party bosses, decide the nominee.
It went so well that they never did it again.
Yes, Hubert Humphrey did such a good job that they didn't do it again. There are police riots in and around the convention. The police are the people rioting, not the protesters. The police do a big old police brutality in and around the convention. It's really bad. It's broadcast around the world. And the Republicans basically seize on it as, we need to be law and order. We're going to, fix this country up. Is this the kind of country we want to be?
The police are the only people who can like beat the shit out of swaths of people on TV and then argue like, don't we need to control all those people who we were beating the shit out of?
I know. Fucking terrible. A young Roger Ailes produces Nixon TV segments in 1968. Nixon, on his way to the nomination, makes concessions to a great guy, a true American patriot named Strom Thurmond, to win the nomination.
What concessions?
He said that he would not support busing or open housing.
Again, anti-bussin'.
Yes, anti-busing.
Yeah.
Nixon was not busing.
Strom Thurmond was like, but you're going to be racist, right?
Yeah.
Like,
And
tell
Nixon was like,
me you're going to be racist.
Okay, I'll be racist. But so this is one of the most interesting things I found in my research. So he is like sort of one of the inventors, or maybe not the inventor of, but certainly one of the masters of the dog whistle, Nixon. He is the whole Southern strategy is what they talk about with Nixon, which is the idea that by winning all of the South, a presidential candidate could obtain the presidency with minimal support elsewhere. Now, at this time, there's a realignment of political power. The Republicans and the Democrats, as we know them today, are very different. The Democrats, there are conservative Democrats. There are liberal Republicans at the time. And the Voting Rights Act of 1965 completely reshuffles all of the political polls. So there are lots of Democrats in the South, people who have voted Democrat their whole life, who are now starting to switch over to Republican. And that's what Nixon realizes, is that I can win in the South, which a Republican really hadn't done before. Now today, that is the seat of power for the Republican Party. Nixon is the one to come up with that strategy.
And this is something that LBJ saw coming, right?
Yes.
Where he famously, sort of when they were doing the Civil Rights Act, said something like, well, we've just lost the South for a generation, or someone, told him that. And there are a couple of great quotes about like how to spend political capital. And yeah, so it was sort of this deal of like, this needs to happen in spite of the political blowback, which is real and predictable.
Yep, exactly. And that's, what makes LBJ a great president. And Nixon,
had he just not done Vietnam,
I know.
He had just not escalated in Vietnam.
Why did you do the Vietnam thing, dude?
Oh my God.
He's such an idiot. It's such a shame. So yeah, the Nixon and the Republicans basically adopt this like states' rights position around civil rights, a reversal of the position of the Civil War era Republicans. The whole Republican Party was founded on the idea of, abolishing slavery. But
who was their guy? What was the name of that president?
Gosh, what was his name? Abraham Blinken? Anthony Blinken.
I think it was Anthony Blinken. Yeah.
Blinken.
The banjo strumming president.
Yes. So there's a lot of dog whistle politics. Speaking in code, they wanted to cut taxes, slow integration, and Republicans run successfully on this strategy for the next 40 years or so. Republicans win 5 of the 6 presidential elections from 1968 to 1988. Nixon won twice, Reagan won twice, and H.W. Bush.
And they only cheated they only got caught cheating in one of them.
Yes, yeah, exactly. He runs on law and order, ending the war. He has this line in an interview with Barbara Walters where he says that a lot of his voters feel an insecurity from the old ways being torn away from them. And I felt like that kind of summarized his whole positioning. LBJ tries to pull off an October surprise by ending the war in Vietnam, and the FBI intercepts a call signaling that Nixon may have thrown a monkey wrench into the negotiations. That has never been historically corroborated, but is certainly notable that it is possible that Nixon prevented the end of the Vietnam War so that he could get elected.
In fairness, it is only on track with everything else he's ever done.
Yeah, right. Yes.
So he allegedly stopped the Vietnam War from ending, just like he allegedly ordered people to break into Watergate.
Right. Allegedly. Real quick, final thing on the 1968 election. George Wallace runs as a third-party candidate. And I think this is very interesting. George Wallace, of course, is the big racist guy from the Civil Rights era.
Democrat.
He wins 13% of the vote. He was like what we would consider liberal. He wanted increases in Social Security, nationalized healthcare, collective bargaining, and he just happened to be super racist. He wanted all of that for white people, and not for other people.
So close. Swing and a miss.
Yes. Yeah. It's just very interesting that like you could be liberal but so hateful at the same time in that era of American politics.
No, we want these socialist policies for us, not them.
Yes, exactly.
Not them.
Exactly.
And then when you are running and other people in your party agree with most of what you have said as far as economic populism goes, you're running on what separates you from the other people. So what's left is just the racism.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, so that's 68. He wins the presidency. He enters office with a Democratic House and Senate. He has a Democratic House and Senate for the entirety of his presidency. Which I think is interesting because he gets a lot done. And that is another one of the things I respect about him. He's a former legislator. He's like a Biden. He knows how to work the levers of power. He knows how, like, where bills get done. He knows who to call. He's good at playing the game. In terms of domestic policy, he does welfare reform. He introduced a new family assistance program. He talks about healthcare reform. He introduced a healthcare plan with a employer mandate. He expanded Medicaid. He opposed busing, as previously said, but he did implement the first affirmative action plan and expanded the Voting Rights Act. He also ordered the FBI, CIA, and NSA to spy on citizens, political opponents, anti-war activists, and so on. So, kind of a mixed
I missed
bag.
that part at the museum, that last part.
Yeah,
they definitely
isn't
got
that
the affirmative
weird?
action thing at the museum. I didn't read about... Did you see the NSA stuff?
I didn't see that there. I saw a lot of stuff about China. Did you know he went to China?
I opened it right up.
He opened it right.
Wide open.
But of course, the one thing that most defines Nixon's presidency, of course, is Vietnam. He secretly, without informing Congress, expands bombing to Cambodia and Laos. He sends troops into Cambodia. Both of those things are illegal and bad. And things in the country are really, really bad. From fall of 1969 to spring of 1970, there are at least 250 domestic bombings. That's just like radical people sending bombs around the country because they're pissed off. Kent State happens in May 1970. The National Guard kills 4 student protesters. 11 days later, Mississippi State troopers kill 2 black students at Jackson State. And Nixon's strategy with the war is we're just going to bomb the fucking shit out of them and inflict as much pain as possible to drive them back to the negotiating table. And some people back then and still today defend this strategy. I would say it's very cruel and mean to do that. And perhaps he should have come to terms that didn't involve bombing civilians and destroying the infrastructure of the North, especially because he knew South Vietnam was going to fall. And we know that because of the tapes, which we'll get to in a second here. But he knew South Vietnam wasn't going to last. But he was fighting to save face for America. And that's one of the things I hate about him. He is the classic like two-faced conniving politician of like saying one thing in public, knowing in the back of when he walks off the stage or whatever, that everything he said was total bullshit.
So part of the, what is it? Is it peace with honor or not
Yes.
defeat with
Peace with honor.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Defeat
the
with
honor
dignity
part,
is good.
yeah, the honor part is just bombing the shit out of civilians.
Yeah. Basically.
Yeah. I also want to go on the record as against that.
Yeah.
Um,
He has a couple of great quotes, like the only place where you and I disagree, and he's talking to Kissinger, at the present time is with regard to the bombing. You're so goddamn concerned about the civilians, and I don't give a damn. I don't care. That's a quote from the tapes.
yeah. Well, glad he was clear with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's so fucking crazy because the reason that we have the conversation about the nuclear bombs in Japan, the reason that there's any moral ambiguity there at all is because it led to the immediate end of the war and America winning it, right? So that's why there's even a conversation of like, was that the right thing to do? Did it save American lives? Was that civilian toll worth it? And you can at least have the conversation and argument on a national stage and not sound like a complete fucking psychopath because America won the war. And it definitely, I mean, it saved American lives. You can argue about the morals. And I would
say the morals are bad. Yeah.
Yeah, they're bad. I also want to go on the record. The morals of dropping a nuclear bomb on a civilian population are bad.
Thumbs down.
The negative utility. But there's no argument to be made for fucking firebombing Cambodia and killing a bunch of civilians because not only is it completely amoral and psychotic, but it didn't work.
It didn't work. There are tapes, and I tried to get this quote. There's just not, and this will get to my bigger point later. There's not a great way to pull the Nixon tapes, which is unfortunate for a number of reasons. But he talks about using the nuke, and Kissinger is basically like, I don't know if that's a good idea, sir. And he's like, oh, come on, God damn it, Henry. We got to have all our options on the table. So he had another quote. He said, it's too damned bad. We aren't decimating the country with all the screaming about civilians. Believe me, if we were trying, the goddamn place would be leveled. So he really, he really wanted to blow stuff up in Vietnam.
So I have a question about this.
Yeah.
Were these conversations after he knew that the South was going to fall?
Yes.
Like, that's so gross.
It's so bad. It's so bad. Do you remember what the exhibit in the Nixon Museum was called?
Oh, fuck. It was like was it a path to peace?
It was a path to peace.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And there's like one plaque in there about Cambodia and how bombing Cambodia is a good thing, it applied pressure on him, and it was brave actually that he, took this step in leadership to.
And not only that, but it was handsome.
He's a good boy. There's so much more. We should do. I think we want to do these yearly, right? Next, I almost called you Nick again.
You called me Nick earlier in the podcast.
I did call you Nick earlier in the podcast. What's wrong with me?
I don't know. I'm very offended, though.
I've known you for 25 years, whatever.
It doesn't bother me when a goddamn cashier does it, Frank. But when one of my oldest friends calls me Nick without any of our mutual friends named Nick around.
Yeah, that's the other thing.
Although, but there is Nixon. I mean, we are talking
Nixon.
So like there is
Mitch,
Nixon. That Nick, the syllable is very present right now.
By the way, is there a full moon happening right now?
I don't know, Fred, is there?
The Fred was a nice touch too, by the way. He does a lot of other bad stuff. I think I'll give you more of this stuff in an episode on Nixon next year. How about that? Because I have so much more. We can come back to. There's so much fucking stuff about this guy, and I love him for that.
We could just keep going with it. I mean,
all Nixon all the time.
We are now a Nixon podcast.
I think you would have to change your name to Nick, though. That would be the only condition.
If it meant that I could talk about Nixon every week, oh my God, I would do it.
All right, so the tapes. The taping system, according to John Dean, who was a senior White House official, he installed the taping system to better take notes. That is apparently the reason it was installed. I haven't been able to find a better reason for it than that, except that LBJ, apparently on the way out, LBJ had the taping system installed, and he was like, hey, you're going to want to keep that because, for like note-taking purposes, it's helpful to have recordings. And Nixon's like, no, fuck that, blah, blah, blah. And then a couple of years later, he's like, yeah, I guess we should get it installed.
Can anyone else remember who I wanted to bomb? All right, get the tapes. I don't remember which country
Southeast Asian. Which civilians did I want to wantonly murder? So he installs the taping system in February 1971. Only 3, I believe, of the people in the White House, other than him, knew that the taping system was installed. So he was essentially spying on everybody in his own White House, including Kissinger. He had Kissinger's phone tapped.
I love that, like, they had it and everyone knew about it. Then he was like,
no, that's not how we do things here. We do things secret.
Yeah, yes, exactly. He's such a weird guy. And he famously won't release the tapes. He still fought even after his presidency to prevent their release. And it wasn't until like 2010 that most of the Nixon tapes were released. So there's some pretty good ones. We won't be able to get to all of them today, but we can do that in another episode. But the tapes are really interesting because they add this whole other dimension to him. Like in public, he was in favor of nominating the first female Supreme Court justice, but then on tape, he is very actively working against it. In public, he's like answering questions at a press conference being like, no, we would never bomb a dam because the civilian casualties would be too high. And on tape, he is pushing for it and like actively pushing against Kissinger, who's like, hey, maybe we don't want to do that. And he's like,
Jesus. So,
yeah.
So in public, he's like, bombing a dam would mean that I'm a monster. And then in private, he'd be like, bombing a dam would mean I'm a monster.
Yes,
I'm a monster.
Yes, exactly. All right. So this is a clip from the tapes.
The press is the enemy. The press is the enemy. The press is the enemy. The establishment is the enemy. The professors are the enemy. The professors are the enemy. Write that in the blackboard 100 times and never forget it.
I know that was probably a little hard to hear and understand. The audio quality was just not as good in the 1970s as it is today. So here's that quote again for you clean. Here goes. The press is the enemy. The press is the enemy. The press is the enemy. The establishment is the enemy. The professors are the enemy. Professors are the enemy. Write that on the blackboard 100 times and never forget it. A cool and normal quote from Richard Nixon on December 14th, 1972. So,
I feel like that's what a school shooter would fucking have written down.
Yeah.
That's a school shooter's last Facebook post is what that is.
He's got a lot of great quotes like that. Let's see.
Sorry, what was your point about that? I jumped.
No,
in.
it's self-explanatory. This is who this guy was, and I love that he recorded himself. It's so great that we get to like see this perspective of a president. Such a great self-own. It's very funny that he did this. It's very funny that it brought him down.
It's crazy that it's not indexed. You're totally right about that. This should be something that is, a FOIA act should be able to like get this to a nonprofit or even just a group of fucking wanton Patreon podcasters to just like put out and a very indexed website of the Nixon tapes.
Hey, is that our new media empire we're about to build?
All Nixon all the time.
All Nixon
Feed
all the
it
time.
into an AI algorithm and have Nixon say the craziest shit.
Well, he said some pretty crazy shit even without AI. Let's hear this tape, which is Richard Nixon discusses homosexuality.
I saw Joe Bob the other day. I was trying to tune into the damn baseball game, and NBC had a game.
How is the audio coming through, by the way? Would you want to read this for our listeners? Would the listener be able to understand what he's saying, do you think?
I think you might have to enhance it a little bit in post.
Okay. If you want, though, you can read it as Nixon, and I could just cut the audio and you can read his quotes.
All right, I'll try that. I'll try to read it. Yeah, do it sort of blind, like whose line is it anyway style.
Yeah.
So I'll read it and then just make sure to get to the next little bit. But yeah, here I'll try it. Okay. This is Nixon Karaoke now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there we go.
All right.
That's our game, Nixon Karaoke.
Yeah. All right.
I told Bob the other day I was trying to tune into the damn baseball game. And then the game went off and CBS came on with a movie. They had two magnificent, handsome guys. And a stupid old fellow in it.
All right, let's pause there. What do you think he's talking about? Do you know what he's talking about yet?
So I did add the second handsome for emphasis. Two glorious young guys and an old stupid guy.
And really think about the old stupid guy and who it could be. You can think about it. We could keep going because he'll get there eventually. He'll give you a couple more hints.
Okay.
And they were glorifying homosexuality.
Oh, is it Some Like It Hot?
No. Good guess. This is Ehrlichman. Was that a panel show?
Hell no. It was a movie.
And then Haldeman. No, that's a regular show. It's on every week. And usually it's just set in the guy's home, Haldeman says. It's usually just that guy who's a hard hat.
Is it the Archie Bunker show?
Yes, it's All in the Family.
Oh, wow.
Nixon saw an episode of All in the Family and went into the Oval Office the next day and was like, God damn it. That's what we're watching right now. It's so funny.
So funny.
It's so funny. So to our earlier question of whether he would be anti-woke, yeah, he would be very anti-woke.
I saw The Force Awakens. But all Luke's character, they massacred him. He used to be hateful.
Yeah. All right, here we go. And he just looks like a slob. Looks like Jackie Gleason, blah, blah, blah. All right. Then he has this hippie son-in-law. The general intent of it is to downgrade him. And here we go. It's back to Nixon after this. So here you go. Back to Nixon Karaoke.
Upgrade the hippie son-in-law.
Make the square hard hat out to be the bad guy. What's it called? I've never seen it.
Archie is the guy's name.
They're just like us.
Yeah. Now that's real family entertainment, isn't it?
The point that I make is that, God damn it, I do not think that you glorify on public television homosexuality. You ever see what happened to the Greeks?
Oh boy.
God. Your drunk uncle at a family event. You know what happened to the Greeks.
Yeah.
Homosexuality destroyed them. Aristotle was a homo. We know that. So was Socrates.
The people who built the foundation of modern society.
Western civilization. Yeah. But he never had the influence that television has. Ehrlichman's trying to be all cute and be like, yeah, Aristotle and Socrates were nothing next to television.
Yeah, boss. Whatever you say, boss. Yeah,
right.
Sure.
There you go.
The last 6 Roman empires.
Oh, I'm not going to say that.
Yeah, you don't need
the
to
last
say that.
6 Roman emperors were Fs.
Yeah. Homophobic slurs.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
You see, homosexuality, immorality in general, these are the enemies of strong societies. That's why the communists and the left-wingers are pushing it. They're trying to destroy us.
Okay. It's just fucking old man corner.
Yes.
It's just boring
Yes.
old man corner.
Yes.
It's the same exact argument
Yes.
that people are making about trans
Yes.
people now.
Yes.
And it is just this regressive, like,
You know what's destroying society? What I can't be bothered to understand.
Yeah.
like
Why aren't there any white actors in TV in commercials these days? You know.
yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. It's all the same shit.
It's the same shit.
so boring.
It's very boring. So anyway, so I think we're just gonna do rat fucking and Watergate as its own episode at this point because
Great.
we've gone long. I will do a couple overall thoughts and then we can get out of here. I learned through this that I get very mad at supposedly like quote unquote apolitical historical docs where there's no framing from experts. There's just excerpts of quotes because I just don't think they're honest. Like I think you need to contextualize stuff. And that's why I'm really glad we're doing this. Not that like we're doing the best at it. You know, we've talked a lot about Riz tonight. You know, I think maybe some historians with actual like degrees and stuff wouldn't have talked so much about Riz and cottage cheese farts, but you know, at least we're contextualizing this guy. And there are a lot of Nixon documentaries that don't try to make an argument about who this guy is. So that's something I've learned from doing this. I also think presidential libraries are a bad thing. After us having gone, and I'll show you why. I'm going to pull this up on the screen right here. And audience, you're not going to miss anything because we're going to talk about what we see. And I could even do this in a incognito window just to show you that it's not just my algorithm or whatever. But look at who publishes when you just search the words Richard Nixon, look who publishes all of the Richard Nixon content on YouTube.
It is the Richard Nixon Foundation.
Everything is the Richard Nixon Foundation. All of it. And guess what they're trying to argue that Richard Nixon is? A really great guy who's really misunderstood and actually was kind of like progressive, like if you think about it, and was kind of like anti-war and like sort of ahead of his time, don't you think? And
I mean, this reminds me of a very famous line in The Power Broker, which is, history will be fought in the SEO metadata of our websites.
And that is clearly bearing it out. I mean, you can find all of the stuff, all the bad stuff, but there is a very conscious effort that we are living through right now that obviously is not being reported on because why would it be? But there is a very strong effort in one corner of the world to make Richard Nixon out to be this great guy. And while I have expressed genuine respect for the guy and genuine empathy for where he comes from and how he positioned himself as a political candidate, he's a bad dude who did really bad things. And I think we just need to be aware of that, you know? And like, super, you know, I don't want to talk too much about Trump on these episodes, but like definitely a precursor to where we are today. Like Roger Stone was a Nixon guy, has Nixon doing the peace signs tattooed on his back. Like, and that's one of Trump's like best friends. So anyway, political libraries I think are bad. All right, here's my devil's advocate case for Richard Nixon. He was a legislator, understood the levers of power, willing to sign bills that he maybe didn't agree with because he knew that it would make him look good and the country wanted it. And I respect that. I respect a president that's willing to do that because Trump wouldn't. You know, there's so many culture warriors today that would just be like, no, I'm not going to do it. And he would fucking do it because he knew he could get the political capital from doing it. And he was like, fine, I'll fucking do it.
Trump wouldn't go along with things that he's against, but he also would go along with things he doesn't care about. For example, abortion. Trump could not give two shits about whether abortion is legal, illegal. Who cares? He does not care. But for political capital, he fought super hard to get the Supreme Court to overturn Roe versus Wade. And now that the tide has turned, he is trying to backtrack from it in a really disgusting way, I think, of being like, well, I mean, I didn't really do that.
Yeah, states' rights. Now that it's back at the States, everybody's so happy that it's back at the States now.
It's what everybody wanted.
It's what everybody wanted. Other things I like about Nixon, he played the piano. He met his wife doing a play. That's cute.
Adorable.
He increased the minimum wage. He signed Title IX, opening the doors for women's and collegiate sports. Welfare reform. He was in favor of universal basic income, which is an insane thing to say. He expanded Social Security. He supported the Equal Rights Amendment. He established OSHA, which is the Occupational Health and Safety Act, establishes workplace safety standards. Environmental policy, he did the Endangered Species Act. He did the Clean Air Act. He did the EPA. He signed the Equal Opportunity Employment Act. He moved the U.S. to an all-volunteer military force. So he did a lot of good things. So I'm not trying to not give him credit. And if the Nixon Library wants to come at me and say I wasn't fair and balanced, suck it.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
They can lick a dick.
Yes, they can lick a dick.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, what your takeaway of Richard Nixon, aside from the bombing of Cambodia, basically evil guy with a not that evil presidency.
Not that evil presidency. And I think you actually said it really well in our last episode. He had a conception of what America was as an idea. And I respect that. I respect that he had a vision for what the country was, what a president was, where America was in the world. I don't agree with it because of the way he conducted Vietnam, but he had an idea of the power of the presidency and he was a student of history, and I respect that. I do think, last thought here, is one of the worst things he did was he nominated Rehnquist to the Supreme Court, who goes on to be Chief Justice. He's nominated to be Chief Justice under Reagan. And Rehnquist is the guy who gave us the Bush versus Gore decision. And he gives us the dissent in Roe versus Wade that was adopted by the courts in the Dobbs decision. So Nixon really is a precursor to a lot of, even though that's way after he died. I mean, he died in the 90s. Bush versus Gore is 2000, obviously. And then Dobbs was 2 years ago.
Lifetime appointments. Great idea.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So, Judgment Zone. How evil are they? So, in C-SPAN survey of presidents, Richard Nixon is ranked 31st overall as of 2021.
In the evil?
No, in the overall rankings of all 46 presidents,
46. Well, 46.
Well, I guess
terms.
45. Yeah.
46 presidents.
Biden wasn't ranked yet because he hadn't served in office yet.
Okay.
So there's only 45. So Richard Nixon is ranked at 31 by a survey of however many historians. So
well, for a guy who had to resign in disgrace, 31's not that bad.
I know. It's not that bad. Let's get to our judgment. That's where history ranks Richard Nixon. What's our judgment? What do we want to rate Richard Nixon out of? We're coming up on the end of this episode. We've had a lot of fun talking about Richard Nixon. We had so much fun that we're going to do a whole nother episode at some point about him. What do we want to rate Richard Nixon out of? We did 5 checkers because Checkers was his dog.
I mean,
for the library.
we could just go with licked dicks.
How many licked dicks would you give Richard Nixon out of 5?
Is 5 the most evil or the worst? Is the least
That's a
evil?
great question. Because this is far right Fright Nights, right?
You know what? 4. I'm giving him 4. I don't care either way. He's getting 4. He's getting 4 licked dicks.
I gotta give him 4 too. I think that's a good number. I'm excited to see where we end up with our next creep that we're about to cover on this show. Mitch, do you want to give a little teaser to our audience?
You've seen him in a movie with a monkey. You've seen him.
Godzilla?
Yes, it's Godzilla, who has a whole alt-right chat history that was uncovered, and it's very upsetting.
I mean,
Real lizard
sense.
brain shit. It is Ronald Reagan we will be talking about, the next big historical Republican president.
Yes.
And I would argue a far more destructive force in American society.
We'll see where we come down in our judgment, but I would say far less likable than Richard Nixon, in my humble opinion. But I could be wrong.
Way less interesting of a guy.
Yeah.
But I do want to make a point about.
Oh yeah, you had something, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just a quick one. Sitting at the Nixon gravesite at the library. There is something about seeing a gravesite and it being the same size as anybody else's gravesite, and there being one bench in front of it, and it just being him buried next to his wife, and sitting there looking at this patch of grass with a simple headstone over it that really does, and this is trite, but does really make you think, like, at the end of the day, this is where we're all going. Nixon, he did a whole lot of this shit. Not most people don't have an entire library of their lives surrounding their grave, but this grave is the same size as every other grave. This is where we all end up. Is the pursuit of power worth it? Is the pursuit of power in the cost of so many human lives? Is that worth it?
Yeah.
You know, we've got one of these fucking things. Is that what you want to do to it? You want to ascend to the presidency by prolonging a needless war and then try to make yourself look good by killing literally at least tens of thousands of people just so that people can remember you? Okay, I'm sitting at your fucking gravesite and your tombstone says the pursuit of peace is man's most noble achievement or some dumb shit like that. Yeah. And it's true, but I mean, that is some fucking jokerfied nonsense to have on Richard Nixon's tombstone. And yet it's impossible not to feel some compassion for a human when you're sitting in front of their gravesite. And so just, I don't know, fucking touch grass, man. I don't have an end to this thought, but everyone chill the fuck out.
Nixon should have smoked a doobie, you know? He should have just, like, you know, chilled out a little bit, man.
Yeah, smoke a doob, lay on the grass. Roll around.
I don't think he did a lot of that. I don't think he like looked at the clouds very often, if I had to guess.
No.
He was too busy watching All in the Family being like, oh, these homos.
He looked at the clouds and he was like, that one's trying to get me.
All right, everybody. Well, thank you for joining us. Mitch, thank you so much for joining me. This is a blast, and I can't wait to talk about Ronald Reagan with you next week.
Thank you. This is so much more fun than it should be.
Yes, I agree. Okay, love you, everybody. Bye.
And so, we close the book, for now, on Richard Nixon. But the American nightmare isn't over yet. Next week, someone is trickling down into your podcast feeds. Next week, we talk about Ronald Reagan. Brace yourselves. Brace one another. Find a loved one. And tell them to like and subscribe, that is. But seriously.
Far Right Fright Nights is a production of Frankincense Media. Produced by Frank Cervarich and Mitch Lerner. Follow us on Instagram, Blue Sky, and get our newsletter at frankincense.io. See you next week, unless you're too scared.